Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today we're going to focus upon indigenous peoples and talk about them in general terms, but also focus on indigenous peoples in the country of the Philippines to see what contributions they are making to promote biodiversity, to promote sustainable development, to combat food insecurity, just a variety of other issues. My guest today is an expert on all of these topics. My guest today is Joan Carling. Ms. Joan Carling from the Cordillera in the Philippines has been working on indigenous issues for more than 20 years. She was twice the Secretary General of the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact from 2008 to 2016, and today she works on the Indigenous Peoples and the 2030 Agenda for Tebtebba in the Tebtebba Foundation in the Philippines. Joan Carling, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me in this prestigious program.
I appreciate you being with me. Thank you. We got a huge agenda here and a lot of important things to talk about. Let's go to the Philippines right now. And within the Philippines is a large country. You have, what, about 140 million people or?
102 million.
102 million people.
Yeah.
Of that, what percentage are indigenous peoples and how many indigenous groups do you have around the country?
Yeah, the current estimate of indigenous peoples in the Philippines now is 14 million. We're around 14% to 17% of the total population. There are at least 110 ethnic groups, and majority are in the south of the country with 60%, and 33% where I come from, which is in the Cordillera up in the north of the big island of Luzon, and some are scattered all over the small islands in the Philippines. So yeah, we're a very significant part of the population of the country.
Mm-hmm. Now, which ethnic group are you a member of?
Yeah, I am a Kankanaey Igorot. Igorot means people of the mountains, because we're in the mountain ranges of the northern part of the country.
I'm curious, the Philippines is a multilingual society in many respects. How many languages do you speak in your area? Do you speak Tagalog? Do you speak Spanish, English? Do you have your own dialect?
Yes, I can speak 3 languages, but you're right, we're a multi-dialect or language country. I think there's more than 100 languages that's been spoken in the country, because we're also different islands, so each group has their own, and until today the diversity in the language is still very much alive.
Describe your community to some degree as far as the size goes, perhaps the physical setting, some of the economic activities that you have to produce revenue and those types of things.
Yeah. Because, like I said, we're from the mountain part, so we're basically doing we're engaging with the forest. So we do gathering of forest products, also gardening or production. My particular people, for example, our identity is very much with the sweet potato, like you. We grow sweet potato on our backyard. That's a given. And we also have pigs and animals that helps, our food production. And we have a lot of rice fields we're known for really nice, what's called rice terraces. So basically that's the main livelihood of our people. But at the same time, now with the changing situation, then of course other source of employment and livelihoods are coming, and people are engaging into labor work and those kind of sources of income.
You say they're moving into other areas now. You're primarily an agrarian society or agricultural base,
yes, we are.
and you're moving into what other types of businesses or industries? Are they moving into artisan work or mining or?
Yeah, that's actually one of the major issues that we're facing, because our area is rich in gold. So since the Spanish colonization, they already came to explore and establish their mining in the Philippines. So we're host of gold and copper mining, and which is also a major problem in relation to environment because of the pollution coming from the milling and then the waste that's been dumped either in the river or near the river system. So we're ending up with serious problems of pollution, for example, of our water bodies, and in certain areas, because the mining is before was underground. Now that they've been abandoned without clear rehabilitation, they've been sinking. The ground has been sinking, and water has been a major problem because the water source has been depleted. So those are the related issues that we've been facing in relation to mining that has been taking place in my region, in the Cordillera region.
Anytime you have mining, there are certain environmental disasters that
I
are looming without a doubt. We look at
there's no way that unless
coal
of
mining
course
and others.
Yeah, but it's we're also known for before the Spanish came, because they colonized us for 300 years. We were actually already doing mining as part of our livelihood. The small artisanal, what they call small scale mining, where you only use water to process and take out the gold. So environmentally, it's not harmful. But now, because of cyanide and mercury, even the small scale mining production is causing environmental problems. So that is also one thing that needs to be addressed.
And we see that in the United States, for example, with the strip mining in East Kentucky, with the deep mining, with fracking of gas. I mean, they're using these horrific chemicals, using immense amounts of water to force gas out of the ground. But it is certainly detrimental to the environment, and it's very wasteful, to be quite honest. But we still need energy, and so we have to hopefully get over to alternative energy soon. That leads into climate change and sustainability. It seems every area of the world has had problems with climate change. Have you noticed in your area certainly that there have been problems?
Because Philippines is also what is called before a disaster center of the world. We're having all sorts from earthquake, typhoon, volcano eruptions. But now, with the worsening climate change, we're getting more and more typhoon. That means heavy rains with strong winds, and a lot of agricultural areas are completely devastated. Houses are really destroyed because, of course, we don't have strong houses, and the crops and because our mountains are not also they're a bit fragile, so landslides has been happening, and this has the frequency of typhoon is really becoming a big problem, that practically the whole year we're having typhoons. So it's difficult for farmers to plan when they're going to plant, when they're going, because you never know. And then typhoon, and it's also combined with drought, like dry season, where for certain parts they're not getting any rain, and then for certain parts it's all rain. So it's really a big challenge on how to deal with this, because it's already affecting food security, health issues, livelihood activities, other livelihood activities of communities. So they're suffering the most, right, in terms of the impact of climate change, especially since they're on the front line. They're in the areas where these are happening, and they don't have access to communications, to roads, So in the last typhoon that has happened in my area, a lot of people were completely isolated. There's practically no relief coming in, because there's no roads. The roads were completely destroyed, or they also don't have connections. But the good thing is, because we're very tight, right? As communities, we have our own cooperation as part of our tradition, as part of our culture, that we help each other. So that is very, very important in how we deal now with the impact of climate change, the kind of cooperation that we have. So in this particular case, for example, people lined up, for example, for like kilometers, passing on the goods until they reach the area. So these are the kind of adaptation or mechanisms that help people deal also with the impact of
It's
climate
that communal
change.
spirit of self-help,
Yes,
but
self-help, cooperating, the
helping each other.
solidarity, the kind of cooperation that we have. So that is critical for us in addressing the impact of climate change.
I noticed your button says Land Rights Now.
Yes.
What exactly does that mean?
Yes, so this is actually a global campaign. It's called Global Call to Action for Land Rights Now. And it's an initiative of indigenous peoples together with civil society organizations like Oxfam, the International Land Coalition. We are in this campaign because we believe that by securing land rights of indigenous peoples, we can contribute more in terms of addressing climate change. We can contribute more in terms of sustainable development. We can address the issue of poverty, for example, and contribute to, because of our rich biodiversity, using our traditional knowledge. So that we have, with the security of our land, then we will maintain not only biodiversity but also cultural diversity, because then we will be able to still practice our culture. We will be able to enhance further our traditional knowledge, which are critical in building resilience also to climate change or addressing climate change. So this campaign, it has more than 500 organizations already, and the aim is to double land rights of indigenous peoples and local communities by 2020.
And of course, indigenous peoples comprise 5% of the population, 7.3 billion people around the world, the total population, and they're on 22% of the land mass, and they have like 80% of the biodiversity within their areas. So there is a tremendous interaction. There's symbiotic relationship between the indigenous peoples and the biodiversity of the area, but also their contribution to maintaining it.
Yes.
And generally speaking, they do a very good job, whereas sometimes the mining companies coming in many cases, do not do a very good job. So it's a tremendous role that you can play.
Yeah. Also because it's actually part of our lifestyle. It's part of our system, and it's part of our vision and worldview, because we're coming from the point of view that we take care, we nurture the land so that there will be something for the future generation. So that kind of principle and values is that and then the relationship that we have with the land, that we don't abuse because it provides for us, so we don't abuse it. So we only get what we need. It's not that, we just take it for whatever commercial purposes, but we always have at the back of our heads that we need to conserve this for the future generation. So that's why it's not coincidental that the richest biodiversity in the world are in indigenous territories. That's not coincidental. It's very much part of us, the way we live, our culture, and the way we manage the resources in our territories.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guests. We would invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you are involved with any type of media outlet, be it a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps it's a university campus that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a media website that you would like to use to share our programs, please do so. Go to our website and download the shows. Global Connections Television is provided free of charge at no cost as a public service. Today we're talking with Ms. Joan Carling from the Philippines and focusing upon indigenous peoples in general and many of the indigenous groups in the Philippines to talk about the major issues that are confronting them, such as food security, education, climate change, and many others. Joan Carling, we have touched on a wide range of topics,
Yeah.
and we've still got several more to go. Before we run out of time, I want to ask you very briefly two events. One is that you have been the Secretary General twice
Yeah.
of the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact.
Yeah.
What exactly is the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact? What does it do to deal
Yeah.
with some of the problems that we're
Yeah.
talking about?
Okay, the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact is like an alliance of indigenous organizations across 14 countries in Asia. So we work in these 14 countries. We have members in all these 14 countries. And what we do is we amplify the voice of indigenous peoples at the grassroots level to draw attention at the national, regional, and global levels. And at the same time, we give trainings and produce a lot of educational materials so that indigenous peoples are aware of their rights and the issues, and so that they can claim their rights, but also for them to be able to promote the things that we are doing well, so that the people will know. And with the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, we're able to generate more attention to the issues of indigenous peoples in Asia. We're able to partner with like UN agencies to provide support to indigenous peoples organizations, and we were able to bring the issues of Asia to global processes like this, the Permanent Forum, the 2030 Development Agenda, the climate change processes. So we link from local to global, global to local. So that's what we've been doing, and so far we're getting more response, and governments are now some at least are moving ahead, like start to put attention to indigenous people's rights, because that's what we've been promoting, the rights of indigenous peoples.
That's a major accomplishment. It certainly is. You mentioned the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, which is part of the United Nations, and they have been actively involved for the past several years on these issues. You're attending a conference this week in New York. What is the purpose of this forum, and what do you hope will come out of it as far as recommendations or suggestions or a strategy to move forward on your issues?
I think the Permanent Forum is a unique process within the UN, because it brings together the government and indigenous peoples on the same level, where we can actually have conversations, and in that conversation we also have the UN agencies. That's part of the mandate of the Permanent Forum. So it's really to mainstream and bring the issues of indigenous peoples to the attention of the government, and facilitate constructive dialogue and engagement with governments, but also with UN agencies, funds, and programs. So the mandated areas of the Permanent Forum, like development, education, human rights, health, are very much part of the realities of indigenous peoples, and we face a lot of challenges that we want to draw the attention and action of governments and states and even other actors. So that's a forum where you can have this kind of presentations and discussions, and then the forum makes recommendations to governments, to not only to governments but also to UN agencies, and we see some progress in the way governments are also dealing with indigenous people's issues, but there's still a huge gap that has to be addressed.
And that's probably true in just about every country of the world where you have indigenous peoples. You're talking about the contributions, how we have to work together, and it brought to mind the Sustainable Development Goals, the Development Agenda for 2030, and of course they're built on the original 8 Millennium Development Goals from 2000 to 2015, and now from 2016 to 2030. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals are going to be to try to eliminate poverty, to eliminate hunger, to promote gender equity, to guarantee equality education, and of course to deal with climate change and to deal with sustainable development. We've been talking about the indigenous peoples and how they're really part of this huge ecosystem, and they're part of the most vital part of the system, as I view it anyway. So their role is just unbelievably important. Are there recommendations that we can make to help us all better understand how indigenous peoples are going to work towards these sustainable development goals, and that we should be, people who don't live in the rainforest of Brazil or wherever the case might be, should be involved in working together?
Yeah, I think the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development opens a lot of opportunities for partnerships between indigenous peoples, academics, governments, even the private sector, in a way that we can promote what we call self-determined development, in a way where we will be able to protect and enhance our sustainable management of resources, because that's one of our biggest contribution to sustainable development. The mere fact that we're able to sustain our resources and the biodiversity therein, which is very much needed now with the problem of climate change, is already putting us as a central player and an actor on the issue of sustainable development. And that has to be acknowledged and recognized in the process. So we are not just a victim where, you know, we need to solve our poverty or our health issues, but we are actually actors that can contribute if only this kind of knowledge and skills and the way we protect our resources, the way we have low carbon lifestyle is going to be enhanced under partnerships. Definitely going to a long way. So within also the 2030 agenda, the one of the call or the major slogan is leaving no one behind. So and we know that indigenous peoples, which is 5% of the population, is 15% of the poor. So we're overly represented with the poorest. But that situation has arisen because of the subjugation, colonization, and assimilation that has happened. And that has to be rectified, and that finally our land rights will be recognized, because it's the land grabbing, it's the discrimination that we face that has brought us in this situation. So we need to look at that and see also the lessons from the MDG. As you mentioned, we were left behind in the MDGs because there was no data disaggregation. We did not participate in any kind of, you know, planning that they did. So they made programs that are inappropriate in our condition, because we have specific conditions that has to be addressed. And with those lessons from the MDG, we're hoping that states and other actors will consider those in the steps that they were going to take, and that we're very much welcome to engage in partnerships and contribute the most on sustainable development.
In the last minute that we have, roughly, how do you view the private sector? How do you view the governments, the different governments? Are they becoming more universities, young people, the millennials, people who are in a wide range of professions? Are they becoming more receptive and more attuned and more cognizant of the issues confronting indigenous peoples, and are really more involved in working with you on these? Now, I know it varies from country to country, area to area, but do you see a difference from where we are today as opposed to 15, 20 years ago?
I think the private sector is now realizing that it cannot be business as usual anymore, right? But it takes them more effort, I think, because their framework is completely different from the whole framework of sustainable development. So there has to be a paradigm shift in how they look at sustainable development vis-a-vis their aim for profit. Because if that will not change, then their engagement with sustainable development will not be transformational. And that is something like, for example, they need to respect human rights. That's a given. They need to allow for equitable benefit sharing. They need to respect the environment. We cannot achieve sustainable development if the private sector will continue to be always thinking of profit and, you know, corporate operation power. Now, but you asked about the millennials, and there's a lot of hope there. I'm optimistic that the young generation now are getting more aware of what's happening in the world. They want to engage, and they should be given that space to engage, because they also have a lot to contribute.
Exactly, they certainly do. We all have to work together on these problems, or we will not be successful. And I think you summarized it very nicely as to what we all need to do, excuse me, and participate as a unified force to combat climate change, to combat poverty, to combat hunger, just so that no one is left behind. But Joan Carling, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you very much.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.